everyone, and this is our seventh lecture. It is also about styles and genres, but it will be different from what we discussed last time. And this time we're going to speak of what is typical and what is individual and unique in style. And we will go beyond the mere stylistic layers of the English vocabulary. We will see that this is only the tip of the iceberg when it comes to styles. And I would like to remind you from our previous lecture that styles and genres and registers are functional and situation varieties of the language that arise from variation in mode or medium, the words used, tenor, status and roles of people and the situation, who is speaking to who, and finally, the field and domain, the subject matter and the function. So last time we spoke only about the first one, about the mode and medium. Today we're going to speak about the field, domain, and partially about the tenor. But mostly this is going to be about field and domain. So what we talk about and what the function of our communication or the text is. I wanted to remind you that the words, the dictionary marks, the dictionary notes, tell us which sphere of communication that or this word or its meaning refers. For example, informal, vulgar slang, formal, technical, literary, dated, rare, historical, humorous, archaic, right? We try to make to understand what these spheres are and how they're structured last time. But in fact, it's not only the words, it's not only the vocabulary which determines the style. It's much more. For example, if we look at the ratio and compare the frequency of use of semi-modals and modal verbs in conversation versus various written registers, we see that the frequency of semi-modals and modal verbs is much, much higher in informal conversation, right? In informal oral conversation. And this is not about the stylistic coloring of the words, right? This is about how we use grammar. So what I'm driving at is that styles involve not only the stylistically colored words, although this is probably the most noticeable parts of each style, but they also involve many other things, including grammar. So if we come back to our first lecture and revisit our first lecture, we'll see the definition of a functional style of language by Ilya Romanovich Galperin, who defines it as a system of interrelated language means which serves a definite aim in communication. Система взаимосвязанных языковых средств. And by language means, we mean lots and lots of different things. It's not only the words, but it's also grammar. So, grammar, morphology and syntax, and actually more things than that. But it's important to realize and to remember that it's a system of language means, not just the vocabulary. And one more part, which we tend to forget, is that each style has its own aim in communication, right? Aim in communication. So in a way, this definition of style appeals to its typical features, right? So functional style is a typical style for some particular type of communication, for documents, for bell letters, for newspapers. It's a typical thing how this or that text should look like. And maybe, I'm not sure whether this is familiar to you, this list is familiar to you, but I think it might be. The 5 functional styles that Ilya Romanovich Galperin identified. Some scholars split some of these styles in 2 or in more parts. Some of them unite several parts, but this is like the classical canon of functional styles. The official document style, the scientific prose style, the belles lettres style. Belles lettres is belletristica, right? Which might include poetry or not, but in this case it does include poetry, emotive prose, and drama. Drama as plays, tragedies, comedies, and so on and so forth. Publicist style, the publicist style. That includes oratory and speeches, ораторские речи, so speeches, essays and articles, essays and articles. In this case, essays and articles are the written equivalents of oratory and speeches. The aim of the publicist style is to persuade people, right? Whether orally or in the written form. And finally, the fifth classical functional style is the newspaper style. I'm sorry, is there a representative of the seventh group in this room? Group 7? Okay. The newspaper style. So it includes brief news items, headlines, editorials, and advertisements. Well, this style is more often than others broken into several subcategories by other scholars. And also we see here the styles have two modes of existence. They are written and spoken. Written and spoken. Very vividly, we can see it on the example of the publicist style. But otherwise, we don't see, well, all the other styles look more like they are the written styles. Let's have a look at the examples of these classical styles. All legislative powers herein granted shall be vested in a Congress of the United States, which shall consist of a Senate and House of Representatives. What style is it? An official document. And which particular document do you think it is? The Constitution of the United States. That's right. That's right. And here I try to highlight certain features which are typical of official documents, and these are the words, right? The vocabulary, but also some grammar. For example, shall be done. So the passive verb, and also the use of this archaic form shall, right? Shall consist. And on the left, on the right, I tried to give the architectural equivalent of the official document style. I think it is closest to classicism, with its symmetry, with its repetitiveness of forms, with its clarity and transparency, with the straight lines, right? I think this is the architectural equivalent of the official document style. And moreover, right, yes. So Hedgestones Walton is an intriguing name, but the limited data allow only speculation. It is tempting to see a tune with high stone walls, but this would presuppose the tune was productive at this date. Which style is it? Scientific prose. This is actually from linguistics. This is a fragment of a scientific scholarly article from the Journal of the English Place Name Society, and this is about place names. And here we see the characteristic vocabulary, the learned vocabulary, which is typical of scientific prose, but also we can see names in Old English, Hedgestones Walton, tune, right? So some specific things which in other spheres is often substituted by terms. And on the right, I think this is the architectural equivalent of the scientific style in a way, something like this postmodern style, right? With its curvy lines, with its metal and futuristic look. A colored dove groaned once in the final light. A pink rose reclining upon the big box head glimmered with contained electric luminosity. This is the example of the belles lettres, of course. This is about emotion. This is about describing nature, right? So all these words are about well, our perception of nature, our emotions that arise when we look at nature, and our associations maybe with love, with some mystery. On the right, I think this is the architectural style, which in a way resembles to me bell letters. What style is it? Huh? What? It's not classicism. Classicism was in the first picture. It's the Baroque. That's right. It's the Baroque with some excess of details, right? And these beautiful lines. And this one, now it is clear that the decline of a language must ultimately have political and economic causes. It is not due simply to the bad influence of this or that individual writer. This is publicist style. This is piece of George Orwell's essay about the English language. What the author is trying to do, he's trying to persuade us or to convince us of some fact. And that's why we have things like must have, causes, and results, due to, and again, so these linking elements, conjunctions, and it is quite straightforward. The vocabulary is logical, but also learned, but not too learned, right? Well, I'm not sure that this is the equivalent. I just added it as one more architectural style. This is the Gothic style, right? So we see that in architecture, we also have this range of styles. And finally, Sadiq Khan declares severe weather emergency as snow could reach London. The Met Office has said that up to 3 centimeters of snow could fall inland in parts of the UK, with higher routes of northeast Scotland expecting up to 5 centimeters. Well, comparing to what we had over the weekend and we are still having today, this is peanuts, really. So what style is it? The newspaper style, the brief news items. What is typical of this? We can also immediately observe, right? This is the use of the present simple because it is about the current news, the present simple. These typical newspaper constructions like something with something doing something else, so trying to combine two events in one sentence, and of course precision, using facts, 5 centimeters, 3 centimeters, names, the Met Office, the Meteorological Office, and quoting, of course, right? Sadiq Khan declares, and then quotation marks. And Met Office has said that without quotation marks, but it's also reporting. And well, the equivalent style to me would probably be this, something similar to our Khrushchevkas and block, yeah? It's newspaper style. But of course, newspapers sometimes have publicist pieces as well, especially the columnists, right? They write pieces to try to persuade and philosophize about things, right? And well, the style is called functionalism. If you ever wondered what it is called, what Khrushchevka's styles is called is functionalism. It must be maximally functional. Now, but I wanted us to look again at the pictures because this will reveal something to us about linguistics and language. So classicism is not only about straight lines and symmetry. It's also about what are classicist buildings usually built of? Of stone. So it also involves material. And one more thing, what are usually these buildings used for? Huh? Well, places of worship, then administrative buildings, they used to be, right? Palaces, maybe some government things, or mansions of rich people. So we have 3 in 1. We have geometry, typical geometry, lines. Then we have typical material, and we have typical function, right? Now let's think about the next one. What is typical of this postmodernist style, postmodern style? What type of lines? Curvy lines, right? Curved lines, not straight lines. Then what about symmetry? Maximally asymmetrical. Material, glass, steel, plastic, right? And finally, function, very often What buildings are usually built nowadays with this? Business centers, right? Sometimes theaters, museums, shopping malls, right? So the function is also different. Once again, geometry, material, and function, and so on and so forth, right? We can continue. So if we come back to the definition of a style by Ilya Galperin, we'll see this, right? We'll see that this is a system. Not only the words, not only the vocabulary, it's grammar, it's function, it's aim, it's the material, so to speak, right? And this gives us, for example, this sort of table. This sort of table. I haven't included the publicist style just for visual purposes, is just to have these 4 styles on one slide. So we see that the lexis here is, well, varies from style to style. Grammar, morphology varies. Syntax has its, well, they have their own syntactical features, logic and function. And let's look at each one of them. For example, for official documents, what is typical? The officialese style of words, legal terms, and archaisms. However, what about stylistic devices? Some sources say that the official documents don't have stylistic devices. I think this is not quite precise. Why? Because it doesn't contain metaphor, of course. No metaphor, no imagery, but there are lots of stylistic devices. For example, repetition, right? When one of the same thing is repeated many times, even if it could be replaced by a pronoun, it is very often repeated with the word in the word form. Why? For precision, right? Then enumeration, when we enumerate all these powers, rights, and so on and so forth. Parallelism, for clarity purposes, right? Parallelism. And well, have a look at this, right? So my attorney, in fact, powers of attorney, доверенность, right? Shall exercise powers, blah, blah, blah. My attorney, in fact, shall have the following powers. And then parallelism, banking, to receive and deposit funds, to have access to any time, at any time or times, to any safe deposit box. Right, so this is parallelism, this is enumeration, right? And this is repetition. In morphology, such documents like the passive voice, right, to achieve maximum objectivity and to avoid these, individual things, but also, well, impersonal constructions. And I wrote, where is it? I actually added something here. Oh, well, yeah, it's lost. I don't know why. It also must have performative verbs. Перформативы. So things like this. I pledge, я обещаю. For example, this is from the Declaration of Geneva. I solemnly pledge to dedicate my life to the service of humanity. And then the disclosure of these performatives. I will respect, I will maintain, and so on and so forth. I grant my attorney, in fact, the powers to set forth herein immediately upon the execution of this document, right? I grant is a performative verb, performative. So the verbs which do things, right? Promise, pledge, grant, and so on and so forth. Syntax can be very complicated. Not necessarily, but it can be complicated with many clauses. Clauses, придаточные предложения. Logic is usually maximally exact, right? It doesn't mean that it is simple or even clear. That's why it is so difficult to read official documents. It's not transparent. It's very complicated, but it's very exact, right? So if we want to understand what it means, we will, and it will be maximally exact. And unambivalent. Unambivalent, недвойственные, to avoid any double readings. And finally, what is the function of official documents? The function of official documents is to fix some extra linguistic arrangements. For example, the agreements between people and rights of certain people, what rights they have, and, well, other things. So what do we see? We see here that these, all that comes before the function, it is the system, right? Out of vocabulary, grammar, morphology, syntax, and logic, which help to fulfill this function, right? All this is the system to serve a definite aim in communication. Moreover, I wanted to draw your attention to the top line. Do you remember our previous lecture? Our previous lecture is only about the top line, right? It's the tip of the iceberg. And today we are dealing with the rest of the iceberg below this, with the rest of the iceberg below this. Now, scientific prose. Of course, the lexis we discussed is scientific words which are typical of scientific prose, special terms, literary words, learned words, the stylistic devices. Again, no metaphors, of course, except in terms, because when scientists make terms, they are very often metaphorical. For example, this, Alice in Wonderland syndrome, syndrome Alice в стране чудес, when a person is lost or sees delusions and things like that. Pigeon breast deformity, деформация грудной клетки, как у, в виде голубиная грудь, right? Protruding. Thorax, it's the medical term for грудная клетка, but initially it comes from the word which meant armor for the breast, кольчуга, панцирь, right? Because it sort of protects our lungs. So there is metaphor here initially. Then one more stylistic device which is typical of scientific prose is understatement, because scientists don't like to tell us for sure 100% what happens, and they're quite right. They provide hypotheses. It could be like that, it might be like that, it is very likely that, but who knows, right? So this understatement is typical of scientific prose, and also quotations, right? Now, when you're writing your diploma projects and papers, you are taught how to quote things, and you must make sure that your text has a lot of quotations, right? That makes, because that, look at logic, it makes the text transparent in terms of authorship, because in scientific prose, when you read it, it must be maximally clear who these words that you read belong to. Are they the words of the author of this paper, or did he copy them from somebody else, right? So the aim of scientific prose is to make sure that every word, it's clear for the reader where it comes from, right? The source. That's why quotations are used. The morphology, passive voice, as you know, notoriously, the passive voice is used in scientific prose in order to sort of distance yourself from what you say and to make it look scientific. On the other hand, actually, there is a difference between the Russian scientific prose style nowadays and the English scientific prose, because now, well, the English scientific prose style would look in more like popular scientific style in Russia, right? It's less rigid, less formal. Then syntax, complicated with clauses, right? So it is complicated. And it can be, it makes the logic complex, but it must be clear, right? What is important for science is that even though the syntax might be complex, the ideas must be clear. And finally, what is the aim of the function of scientific prose? This is to inform about new ideas, to invite other scholars to discuss things and to explore, and also to educate the general public. Right? To educate the general public. Now, the bell letters style. As you remember, it includes literary, emotive, and expressive words. There are multiple stylistic devices. All the stylistic devices that we discussed, they are in the bell letters style. There is nothing specific about morphology. It can jump and leap and do all things they want. Syntax, the same. Logic is very complex because the text in bell letters can start with previous events, or it can start with the future and then go back. There can be flashbacks. There can be like gap sentence links. So the logic is really, really very complex. And the function of bell letters is to make, well, some scholars write that the first function of bell letters is to entertain. Well, I partially agree. It is entertain, but not only. I think that most authors don't write their works solely or primarily to entertain people. They also write it to make people think. If we speak of, well, quality literature, right? Dostoevsky, Tolstoy, Chekhov. Well, these are like stereotypical examples, right? To make people think, to entertain them, but also to persuade, like those authors that I mentioned. They also wrote their works to educate the public in morals, right? To persuade them to be like more friendly, more family oriented, things like that. And to advocate, продвигать, to advocate certain core values, right? Or values that the author wrote about. The newspaper style uses cliches. Sorry. Sorry. I skipped one thing in the morphology of scientific prose. These are noun phrases. Noun phrases. They're very typical of scientific prose. What is this? Noun phrases means a noun with its dependent members of the sentence, right? With its dependencies. Scientific prose likes noun phrases but doesn't use a lot of verbs. There is little motion there. A transparent removable alignment grid for drawing external landmarks on the skin, right? The red colored parts are the noun phrases. Now we go back to the newspaper style. Cliches on the lexical level. Cliches are typical of the newspaper style, political and economic words, emotive and expressive words as well. For example, well, the cliches. Vital issue, well-informed sources, хорошо информированные источники. Nobody knows what they are, right? Overwhelming majority, captains of industry, pillars of society, right? So these cliches, they are typical of the newspaper style. I copied it from a book on functional styles. And also such emotional and expressive verbs such as slash, срезать, so decrease, diminish, X, to cancel, curb, to contain, to check, fraud, probe, to try and to try, soar, to go up, to plummet, to go down. So all these expressive verbs, they're typical of the newspaper style. Then, well, as for syntax, syntax can be varied, same as in the bell letter style. The logic, it's various, it's varied, but there is this, one of the typical logical structures is the inverted pyramid. When you first give lots of facts, and then you come to the final conclusion. It can be top-down pyramid, of course. You give the general statement, but then you give the supportive things. But very often it is the supporting things, the facts, arguments, and then you come to the conclusion. And also other logical figures are possible. And the function of the newspaper style is to inform about the news, to entertain, to persuade, to arouse emotions. So different parts of the newspaper perform different functions. Right. So do we have a general picture now? Now, using a phrase from my previous lecture, you haven't seen nothing yet, right? So this is, now, if we think that there are only 5 styles, don't you think this is a little bit little? So if we compare this with what David Crystal says, he has a slightly different classification of styles. Or rather, he doesn't speak of styles. He speaks of language for special purposes, which I think, in a way, includes the concept of style, or rather correlates with the concept of style in Galperin. Well, these are the sections of his Encyclopedia of Language and Encyclopedia of the English Language. I copied them here for you on the slide. So he speaks of, for example, things like language and religion, the language of science as a separate language, or rather sub-language, right? The language of medicine, he doesn't include it in science, right? Because medicine and science are different things in the English conceptosphere. The language of the law speak. Here we tend to sort of unite them under the heading of what? Scientific prose, right? So roughly it corresponds to scientific prose. But not only, it's more than that. Language and the press, the language of broadcasting, the language of advertising, he has separate sections on them. But in Galperin's classification, it more or less corresponds to the newspaper style, right? And then one more section is on the language of electronic technology, the language of the internet nowadays. So these are the main things that he speaks about. Slightly different, don't you think? But also quite valid. So is there any system in the systems of styles? He also, David Crystal also speaks of the restricted varieties of language and gives as examples of very restricted examples of language for special purpose. Navy speak. Navy speak is like communication with flags. Air speak, the language of airplane dispatchers and pilots when they communicate with each other, right? Ground instead of earth, so technical meanings and how they send messages to each other. Knit right, I hadn't know what knit right is before I read this section of David Crystal's encyclopedia. I hadn't thought that it actually exists as a separate system. Is anyone here fond of knitting? Yeah. Do you read something on the internet how to knit? So what does it include? Right. So stitches and abbreviations, where to knit what, right? So it's a separate system. Bookright. Recipes. Also, there are typical, well, there is a typical layout of a recipe. There are typical even verbs and metaphors which are typical of Cookright. What is right? You will probably never guess. I also hadn't thought of it before I read it. Well, look at this. This is right. Smith Williams, on the 6th of July at St. Mark's Church, Holyhead, Anglesey. John, eldest son of Dr. and Mrs. Gilbert Smith of Birmingham, to Mary, only daughter of Mr. and Mrs. Michael Williams of Holyhead. It's from the newspaper. It's a wedding announcement. That's right. It's an announcement of the wedding. Brown, on March the 8th, peaceful at home in Dublin, age 68 years, Michael Edward. Right. It's not an obituary yet. It's an announcement of a death, right? And who is left? The son. Probably it's the son who remains, Michael Edward. Right, and it also has its own layout and structure. And chess right, finally. This is chess right. You see it on the right, right? The conventions of reporting chess tournaments. So, and my question is, are there more? Are there more? Where is the end to this sea? Probably there is no. But my aim was to try and finally, I think every statistician would like to devise their own system of styles, like the system of everything, you know, the system of everything. And well, I tried, and I'm going to show you my attempt to do this. But I want, in doing so, I had to mix two notions of style and genre. So in a way, I equate style and genre. Sometimes colloquially we do this. For example, we say genre of music or style of music. Have you ever thought of the difference? Well, rock, is it genre or style? Probably primarily genre, but you can also style something as rock music, right? Or for example, pop music, right? It's also genre. So what is the difference between style and genre? There are lots of terminological discussions, of course, right? And some people defend their own points of view. I think, in a way, we could sort of equate them, broadly speaking, right? But style concentrates more on how something is done, and genre is the same thing, but which concentrates on what is said, right? So on the medium and on the domain. But if we mix it together, we get what we usually call functional styles or genres. And I tried to identify the aspects, the elements of style, which actually determine whether we deal with the same style or with different styles. And first comes the sphere. For example, presidents, administration, well, government and administration. That's the sphere, right? It's very different from medicine, for example. However, inside this sphere, there may be different topics and content, right? For example, there is a Ministry of education. It will have one type of topics, and there is the Ministry of Defense, which will have a completely different number of topics. But they all both belong to the sphere of administration and government. Next, extra-linguistic context is important. Also etiquette and rules which surround the use of language and surround the communication. For example, if we speak of the medical speak, right, of the law, of the language of medicine, if the doctor talks to you, what is he not supposed to discuss? Well, other patients. That's right. That's right. Otherwise, well, I think almost all topics are open for discussion. But primarily, of course, it's health, right? Primarily it's health. However, is he allowed to tell about your diagnosis to somebody else? No. So that's a rule, right? But sometimes it is possible to tell about the diagnosis to the relatives, right? So there are certain conventions which surround the use of language, and some genres have more conventions than others. Then the aim and the function. For example, if we continue this medical line, the aim of a medical interview, what is it? When you come to a doctor and he interviews you, to find out what the matter is, to find out your condition, right, and to take analysis, right? Well, and then to define what the problem with you is. However, what is the aim of an epicresis? Epicresis, выписной epicris, when you are discharged from a hospital. What is the aim of writing this document? To describe your condition so that further hospitals and outpatients clinics know what's wrong with you and can treat you more effectively. So the aim is slightly different, right? The goal is, well, the aim is maybe the same, but the function is different. Then medium. A lot depends on whether the document is written or oral or electronic, because electronic communication combines both features of oral speech, like, for example, texting, right, and writing on messengers, and written communication. First of all, because it's written, and secondly, because there are, well, things like websites and blogs. Then, logic and emotive coloring. How much logic must we have? How much emotional coloring must we have? What should it be? For example, again, is it possible to use emotions in an agreement between companies? No, no emotional thing, no emotive verbs. However, for example, if your doctor is talking to you, is it possible to use emotive words to encourage, right? To encourage, especially to encourage a patient, right? If it is not a very grave condition, but even then, right? So doctors can use emotive lexis for encouraging, for sort of raising the mood of the person, improving the mood of the person. Then layout and structure. From school, you remember that what two different letters have two different layouts. The formal letter and an informal letter must have their own layouts. Then a recipe must have a different layout from, say, from a short story. An essay must have a different layout from an informal letter. And this is one of the things, this is probably the tiniest thing, the tiniest particle, icicle of this iceberg, right, that we have to deal with at school. But actually, it's more than that. If you teach, for example, creative writing, you can use all this, right? Creative writing, creative speaking. So these are the elements of style, which I think determine finally what style we deal with. This is the same thing, but it's just a different layout. I thought that it might be visually different, right? It's a pyramid of aspects, of elements of style, where the sphere is at the bottom, then topics and content, extra-linguistic context, etiquette and rules, aim and function, medium, written, layout, logic, and finally, the typical phonetical, lexical, grammatical, morphological and syntactical, and textual features, So there are types and stylistic devices. It all comes on top, right? This is the top of this iceberg, right, that we deal with, but it has a lot below, right? And all of this, all that is below, determines which phonetics we're going to use, which words we're going to use, and which grammar we're going to use in our oral or written speech. And finally, now we have come to my attempt to the system of everything, right? To the system of all styles and genres. It is very simple on the one hand, very simple. It's not very innovative, but I think it nicely sort of puts together all the things, and more of it provides a broader context for Ilya Romanovich Galperin's 5 functional styles, for what David Crystal calls varieties of language. And here, this is a scale from, well, going from, well, depending on the sphere, this is what stylistics is about, right? Going from the sphere, stemming from the sphere, where it comes from the most elevated and the most formal elements, going down to the least formal elements, to the most informal things, right? To the most informal spheres. And here it is the tenor. To remember the medium, the tenor, and the domain. It's also important who we are talking with. The higher the person we are talking with, the more formal, and well, the more formal the domain and the more formal the words, right? And it all starts with religion, right? Religion is by far, well, it's understandable why Galperin didn't write about religion. He wrote back in the Soviet time when it was like a sphere which was in academic institutions, largely it was sort of bypassed. So religion, of course, is the most formal sphere of language, and it has its own style, and it has its own genres. And then it also, I think it is useful to divide styles and genres by oral and written medium, right? For example, oral genres include sermons and prayers, проповеди и молитвы, right? These are oral things. And written, holy scriptures, religious treatises. What are treatises? Трактаты, религиозные трактаты, religious treatises, saints' lives, жития святых, right? This is a genre in its own. So I only give here examples. Of course, it is much, much broader, and we're going to look at very shortly at a broader list for 2 spheres. Then, state law and administration. Here we talk with the government, right? Superhuman formations, but it is the most formal of all human, involving only human-to-human communication, right? Genres. State law and administration. Here we can deal with addresses, court like the address of President Vladimir Putin to the Federal Assembly, right? Court procedures, which are also carried out orally. And officialese, when we talk to officials in various situations. It can be written like constitution, codes. What are codes in Russian? Кодексы. The penal code, the civil code, гражданский кодекс, уголовный кодекс, orders, приказы, указы, memos. So orders is more like указы, memos like приказы in a company. Statutes, уставы, agreements, соглашения. They have their own layouts, of course, right? They have their own cliches. Then, lower than that is profession, so our working life. When we come to work and we communicate with our elders, with the superiors, and with our peers, but in working context. And here we have professional communication, if we talk shop. Oral reports, when you report to somebody, for example, at заседание кафедры, right? The meeting of the faculty. There are oral reports. When we stand up and we give reports, what we have done, for example, or how the students have performed. And this involves its own layout and structure and style. The written part, scientific and professional prose, scientific articles, but also manuals, for example, right? Manuals. They are also, in a way, they reflect this professional side of our lives. Then we go down, right, to media, literature, and advertising. In a way, under this subheading, I unite things which in Ilya Romanovich Galperin's classification were classified as bell letters, and the newspaper style, right? But here I sort of unite them because they belong to this sphere of media, literature, and advertising. This is not an ideal classification, so don't expect that from this. So orally, it could be speeches, maybe less formal than the address of president. Oratories, well, again, they can be in church as well, but they can be oratories in public, you know, by some outstanding actor, somebody. Broadcasting, commercials, these are just very small examples. Many, many more are here. Written, editorials. Do you know what an editorial is? Well, unless you are unless you are a frequent newspaper reader, you will probably not know what it is. Written by the editor is the editor's piece. For example, if you open The Guardian, you'll have The Guardian View, and they have a special column where the editor tells you his or her opinion on the current events. Headlines, articles, news, columns. Well, you know columns, right? Kolonki, the author's columns. Essays, obituaries. What are obituaries? Вот как раз кто? Necrology, right? Ads. But also then, if we come to literature, novels, fairy tales, short stories, poems. So this is sort of medium layer of social life, right? It can be serious. It can tend more to go up, like serious literature, or it can tend to go down to the informal style. Other entertainment. So it may include very other things, but entertainment is clearly rather informal. For example, sport commentary, game speak. What is game speak? Right. When we play something, like if we play Mafia, right? One of our popular games here in Russia, that's also game speak, right? If we play computer games, that's also game speak. Sport articles, programs, things like that. Some thematical programs on TV. And finally, we come down to the very basic, but also very important sphere, which is very informal, right? This is family and friends, which is less formal even than media, literature, and entertainment, where we can encounter people who are not our family and friends. And this is discussion. We can have a discussion or an argument with a friend or with an acquaintance of ours. It can be a chat, when you just chat about things, jokes, right? On the written side, it can also include letters, informal letters, postcards, telegrams, which nobody writes anymore nowadays, right? To-do lists, memo notes. Don't forget the chicken in the fridge, right? Diaries and epitaphs. Well, it may be arbitrary to put epitaphs into this category rather than into religion, but epitaphs can be really, really personal, like to the dearest beloved grandma from her, grandma Annette from her beloved grandsons, something like this, right? Well, you probably have come across such epitaphs, which are really personal with poems, which only the friends and family can appreciate, really. So that's why it gave me an idea to put epitaphs here. Then the next part of this comes with the era of the internet, right? E-communication mirrors, right? In a way, e-communication being the virtual world, the virtual reality, it provides a mirror to the real reality, right? And it doesn't mirror all the genres, but some of them are mirrored with certain, well, peculiarities. For example, this is something I owe this top line to the students from the previous groups. They prompted me that nowadays there is e-communication in religion. For example, online preaching on YouTube. Or live streams of services which arose with the COVID, right? So, for example, nowadays you can open YouTube and watch some service from a church in real time. Then state law and administration, all official forums. Then something I decided not to transliterate is gosuslugi, right? This official websites of the of our authorities. But also e-communication on the written side includes email, writing emails to the authorities, then visiting their websites and reading what they wrote. Then on professional occupations, this is also, I give thanks to the students who were here before. They prompted me that Teams, of course, is one more domain where we communicate on working matters, right, electronically. And it includes its own style, of course, right? Well, it is similar to the real lifestyle, but it does have some peculiar features. Websites, then forums, YouTube, commentaries, newsletter, wiki technologies, when different people can add into the common shared space, right? We can generally call them wiki technologies. So shared space. Entertainment, social networks, virtual game worlds, forums, websites, family and friends, chats, messengers, emails, blogs, things like that. So, and of course, I'm interested to hear what you think. Do you like this classification? Do you feel it is, well, a good, well, sort of an attempt to build a system of everything in stylistic? Or if you have any questions, if you have any criticism, I'm more than happy to hear this, because it will help me to improve my system. So any ideas that you have in connection with this? Do you feel it is largely true? Yes. Differences. Oh, I'm sorry. Can you finish it with the?
I wanted to start shouting, but you didn't let me. So what I was talking about is that it's great that people try to update the information which is connected with different styles, functional styles, in particular, because I suppose people do need to know how the language is changing within different platforms, not only like in paper, but also in the spaces that we use more often nowadays, which is internet. And yes, as for example, my work, which I'm going to defend this year, it is connected partially with this topic, and so I'm really interested in what you're talking about today. So thank you for the references and for sharing this classification. It would be very tanned. Thanks.
All right, thank you very much. Thank you for this feedback. And yeah, and I would like to say again that if you have any more ideas, what to add, how to reshuffle all this, I would be very happy to hear this. And yes, you're right. And moreover, I would also want to add a pedagogical dimension to this, because if you teach students, you must bear in mind that below this, what we teach them, there is this iceberg of stylistics, right? Where we must also know what we're teaching, right? What type of writing, how to write on the internet, what are the conventions and etiquette of writing on the internet, that or this style, and to teach students to be sensitive to the stylistic nuances, right? To the stylistic nuances of the text. Now, this is to illustrate to you that this was just a very brief list, right? These were just examples. Yeah, we ain't seen nothing yet, right? So it is one more, again, not full, but a fuller list of different genres within two spheres, religion and medicine. For example, in religion, we can go further and see the sacred writings, readings, чтение из Священного Писания, preaching, liturgical forms, which are very many-faced, invocations, призывания, petitions, прошения, doxologies, словословие, intercessions, ходатайство, thanksgivings, благодарение, rosaries, so read individual short prayers in a line, Litanies, yiktiniya, that's what you hear at church when a deacon says it in church. Hymns, gimni, psalms, psalmi, canticles, песни. And each genre has its own layout, its own cliches, conventions, and aim. So it is a style in miniature. You see how interesting? We can scale, масштабировать, a style from a very broad notion to a very small notion, right? In medicine, we can have communication between colleagues, medical interview or consultation when we come to the doctor and speak to them, a scientific article on medical issues, medical textbook, which will have different conventions from a medical article, right? Because it will have to be more transparent and clear for the students. Case studies, it's when you take one particular medical case and study from various points of view. Anamnesis, it's when the doctor puts down what you tell them during the medical interview, what your condition is. Diagnosis, that's what the doctor think what illness you have. Epicresis, that's the paper with which you are discharged from hospital. Clinical notes, I'm not sure myself what they are. And prescriptions, right? This is something which allows you to get some medicine at the chemists. So it is just, again, a glimpse into the richness and treasure, the rich treasures of different styles, sub-styles, and genres within each sphere. Now, if we go even deeper and see what are the linguistic, specifically linguistic features, we will see that each small subgenre has its own features, which it shares with other subgenres within a big style, but it might have its own features. For example, this is from David Crystal. Text, a liturgical prayer. Almighty God, our heavenly Father, who of thy tender mercy didst give thine only Son, Jesus Christ, to suffer death upon the cross for our redemption. And then Crystal analyzes this. For example, the distinctive features, vocative, звательный падеж, right? O Almighty God, our Father. Then use of thy and thine, these archaisms, right? Thy, son. The word order is not as strict, is not as modern, as strict as we have today. So we can have these parentheses, inverse pieces, detachments inside, right? Who of thy tender mercy. This is the word order which is not typical of modern speech. Archaic past tense, didst. Capitalization, for example, father capitalized, son capitalized. Collocations, typical collocations of prayers. Of thy tender mercy. Father of Almighty God who suffer death, cross redemption, right? These things come together. So these collocations are typical of prayers. And the same analysis can be applied to all other spheres. Now, let's have a look at some examples, and just for entertainment, tell me, we are going to recognize these pieces of text by their layout, by their subject matter, and by the words they use. When do you feel tired? What sort of pain is it? Medical? Interview, right. Day in, day out protection, satin soft skin, top quality bulbs. Advertisements, of course, advertisements. The reason for denying an appeal in the latter case is not because the order on the motion to vacate is not within the terms of section 963. It's not scientific. It's an official legal document, probably a refusal of an appeal, отказ в апелляции. It's 6 o'clock, the news from the BBC with Ashley Jones. A news program, right? On radio or on TV. Protest on rail cuts. New move on libraries. Pork chop, meat banned from pubs. Headlines, right? Here lie the bodies of epitaph, right? Sift the flour and baking powder together in a bowl. A recipe. Thou shalt not kill, thou shalt not commit adultery, thou shalt not steal. Commandments, right. Заповеди. Turbulence deep within these clouds gives rise to knots with sufficient mass that the gas and dust can begin to collapse under its own gravitational attraction. A scientific article. This is from the website of NASA about the process of how new stars are formed. Oh, well, maybe, yeah. It's Marky with a lovely little pass to Keegan. Keegan back to Marky. Marky in possession here. Spar's commentary, right, in possession of the ball, right? Pass, pass. Марки делает пас Кигану, Киган обратно отдает Марки, right? Мяч у Марки, right? Now, if we go, this is again from David Crystal. I'm abusing him, but I think everybody is. He's such a wonderful linguist and popularizer of science. Now, if we look at the various modes of existence of language, we go from the very general thing like English to more specific things like English of the 90s, American English of the 90s, educated American English of the 90s, spoken educated American English of the 90s. And here we are already dealing with style, right? Spoken educated American English of the 90s, spoken educated political American English of the 90s, spoken educated political American English of the 90s as heard in speeches, spoken educated political American English of the 90s as heard in speeches given by Bill Clinton, right? And here we pass on from the notion of functional style to the notion of individual style, right? And this is the second phase of style. We remember that the first definition given by Galperin was about typical things for typical situations. An individual style is a unique thing for a unique person or unique author. And it is a unique combination of language units, expressive means, and stylistic devices peculiar to a given writer, which makes that writer's words or even utterances easily recognizable. I intentionally split this definition into three for you to see the logic of this definition. So unique, peculiar to a writer, and that makes it recognizable. Unique combination, peculiar to a writer, makes it recognizable. An individual style. Right? So unique and recognizable are maybe the keywords, right? Now, I'm going to give you just one example of individual style. This is Shakespeare's style. It is well researched. And well, some features, not all again, but some features which are characteristic of Shakespeare are the rhyming couplet at the end of scenes. When he writes his scenes, he likes to finalize them with a rhyming couplet. For example, hear it not, Duncan, for it is a knell that summons thee to heaven or to hell. Не слышь этого, Дункан, это звон колокола, который призывает тебя в рай или в ад. Soliloquies. Soliloquy is a learned word for a monologue, right? A soliloquy is a monologue in plays. Monologue. So Hamlet's soliloquy, to be or not to be, right? All the world's a stage. All these are soliloquies. Shakespeare liked soliloquies. Double entendre and bawdy punning. Double entendre is a French term. Oh, it's a barbarism in literary criticism and in linguistics to speak of the obscene hints. Right, so double entendre, when you can hear it in two ways, as a straight thing and as a slightly obscene thing, improper thing. And bawdy punning, which is the same. Puns which are obscene. I'm not giving you examples. Commonly used words include anon, сразу же, и тут же. He liked this word. Brave. So the numbers in the brackets show how many times he used them all in all, I think. And base, oddly. So he liked these words. He uses them often. And well, of course, that gives us an opportunity to recognize authors by their style. I just wanted to give an example. It's a funny example. It's from Contact, as many things we have nowadays. But I think it's a brilliant one. It is the fairy tale, Little Red Riding Hood, rewritten as it would have been rewritten by various authors. And you can recognize the style. По опушке старого мрачного, обвитого в таинственно жесткую вуаль леса, над которым носились темные облака зловещих испарений, и будто слышался фатальный звук оков, в мистическом ужасе жила Красная Шапочка. Эдгар По. Но она была достойной дочерью своей расы, в ее жилах текла сильная кровь белых покорителей Севера. Поэтому, не моргнув глазом, она бросилась на волка, нанесла ему сокрушительный удар и сразу же подкрепила его одним классическим апперкотом. Волк в страхе побежал. Она смотрела ему вслед, улыбаясь своей очаровательной женской улыбкой. Джек Лондон. «Мы с тобой одной крови!» — крикнула Красная Шапочка вслед волку. «Доброй охоты!» Rudyard Киплинг. «Иди ко мне», — сказал волк. Красная Шапочка налила 2 рюмки коньяку и села к нему на кровать. Они вдыхали знакомый аромат коньяка. В этом коньяке была тоска и усталость. Тоска и усталость гаснущих сумерек. Коньяк был самой жизнью. «Конечно», — сказала она, — «нам не на что надеяться, у меня нет будущего». Волк молчал. Он был с нею согласен. Well, Eric Maria remark, right? So we see that the choice of subjects, the choice of collocations, they make these writers' work recognizable. And this illustrates this individual style. Now, how is it used scientifically? It has an application, a serious application. In forensic stylistics, судебная стилистика, forensic stylistics, and in stylometry or stylometry, stylometry, when we measure, when we analyze something with the piece of writing with computers, and we analyze what is typical of the style of any author, be it a literary author or just any one of us. And it is used for 2 things, for author identification, and again, it's the same thing, but it's like a specific application, plagiarism. So author identification, it has been used for a long time now, that by this style we try to define who the author is. And probably, well, we start with the recent ones. At the end of the 20th century, a terrorist who was called Unabomber in the newspapers was identified by his writings. He killed 3 people, I think. And he was against the industrial society. He advocated going back to the primitive society, to lack of electricity, because he thought it was destroying the environment. And because of that, he killed people. But he published this, or he sent somewhere, this manifesto, the Unabomber Manifesto, where he used several phrases. One of them he used was called cool-headed logicians. And his brother suddenly recognized his phrase. He thought that that might be his brother with whom he had lost touch. So he reported that to the policeman. And that was true. They found him because of this typical collocation. And he was imprisoned. Ted Kaczynski, the Unabomber. Jack the Ripper at the end of the 19th century was also partly identified by what he wrote. And very recently, after some period of doubts, when some scholars doubted that the Wuthering Heights, Грозовой перевал, that was written really by Emily Bronte, they thought that it might have been written by one of her sisters. But after analyzing it with stylometry, they confirmed that it was indeed Emily Bronte, because it was, well, the style of the Wuthering Heights was well, correlated, harmonized, was in harmony with the other writings, confirmed writings of Emily Bronte. And plagiarism, of course, plagiarism can be recognized by the typical collocations. And one of the classical examples is the exposure of the donation of Constantine, an antique document which claimed that Emperor Constantine the Great, who lived in the 4th century, Constantine Veliki, who founded Constantinople, this document claimed that he gave the western part of the empire, so Rome and Italy, to the Pope of Rome, Pape Rimskому. And the popes of Rome used this document for centuries to sort of to show that they had power over Italy and Rome, not only spiritual power, but also secular power. But not only they, many other people used that. And only in the 15th century, it was proven by Lorenzo Valla that that was a forgery, a later forgery. It could not belong to Constantine the Great. He analyzed the Latin of the 4th century, or the language of the 4th century, and the language of the nation of Constantine, and proved that people did not speak like that in the 4th century. It is a later style. And finally, we must talk about stylistic devices, which include shifting of styles. We partly talked about them last time. We talked about bathos. But restylization, stylization, re-registration is a broader concept than that. It's not only about parody. You can also structure and stylize a piece of something in another style and achieve a more expressive effect by this. For example, this is a fragment from John Galsworthy, when one character starts to criticize the Forsytes, the capitalists, for their selfishness, for their inability to see other people's grief. But he does that in the style of a lecture. I should like to lecture on it. Properties and quality of a Forsyte, as if Forsyte was an animal, right, or an insect. Hereditarily disposed of myopia, наследственно предрасположенный к близорукости. He recognizes only the persons and habitats of his own species. Он опознает только лица и места своего собственного вида. Right? Meaning that he's like blind. He doesn't see other people who are below him. Then what else can you restylize? You can, well, there may be lots of examples, but not much time. So this is one more example of Langston Hughes' poem stylized as an informal letter to his mother. Dear Mama, time I pay rent and get my food and laundry. I don't have much left, but here is $5 for you to show that I still appreciate you. And finally, your son, baby, respectively as ever, Joey, right? This is free verse, but it's stylized as an informal letter. Then some, just very few examples. Eugene Onegin. It is a novel, but it's written in poetry, right? So it is stylized as poetry. As even, do you remember that Eugene Onegin is written in what's the name? In sonnets, right? It's a series of sonnets. The Diary of a Madman by Dostoevsky. It's a novel, but it's styled as if it is a diary, right? You read it and it is a diary, but you get the plot from the diary. The Little Prince. In fact, it is a philosophical treatise, right? It's a philosophical paper, but it's styled as a fairy tale. And finally, the very touching example, something which is attributed to Ernest Hemingway, that for a competition, he decided to write the shortest possible short story. For sale, baby shoes never worn. It is styled as what? As an ad in a newspaper, right? Classified ad when somebody is selling baby shoes, but it is as big as a short story. Stylization is often seen visually, right? People like to stylize the script that they write in. For example, this is from Nottingham. Ye olde trip to Jerusalem. This is the name of a pub. And they claim this is the oldest inn in England. I visited it when I was in Nottingham, right? But you see that it is stylized as if it is in medieval English, ye olde trip to Jerusalem. Well, other things like this appear, which of course are very modern. Ye olde pizza parlor, right? As no pizza in England in the Middle Ages. Then, of course, the major application of styles is in advertising, right? Well, I borrowed these ones from the internet. This is a retro style advertisement of YouTube. Well, as if it needed advertising. Your films will last forever on YouTube, the champion address on the internet. And you see these retro TV sets and keys and everything. And this is an advertisement of medicine for joints, right? Joints sustawy. And it shows an ancient Greek black figure man who has apparently has very healthy joints, right? I like this very much. This is a box. Do you know palich? Palich Fedoskina, the traditional Russian crafts and styles of painting, miniature paintings. Usually they paint fairy tales, but this box was produced to commemorate the revolution, the 1917 revolution. So it shows us the events which happened during the revolution. You see the workers with the red flags, Bolsheviks, Lenin. You see Lenin in a room talking to his to other people, but it is stylized, of course, as a fairy tale because it is palich. This is again a very good example. I think it is a very very nice example of restylization. The original is here, right? Купание красного коня. You see, this is symbolism. But if you restylize it, it may look like this in the Art Nouveau style: constructivism, surrealism, classicism, pop art, impressionism, abstractionism, primitivism, ancient Egypt, prehistoric people, ancient India, right? So this, I think it's like placing the same thing into different styles and techniques. And how much time do I have left? 2 minutes left. I wanted you to demo. Well, you can do that yourself. You can restylize the same slide in different styles in the PowerPoint, and you will see that it is a system of the color scheme, the scripts, and everything. Now, finally, if I still have 2 minutes left, I'll finish with what I intended to read. This is about lexical expressive means. This is not very much connected with the styles, but it's like a leftover. It's something that I must read. And so what are the lexical expressive means? Synonyms and antonyms, usually words of emotion and assessment. Animating, electrified, exuberant, magnanimous. What is magnanimous? Великодушный, right? Gracious, benevolent. So synonyms and antonyms. Concrete language, which describes concrete actions. Shuffled, шаркать, strolled, marched instead of just walked. Sensory language, laughter, stench, twirled, so the words which conjure up images. Idioms and catchphrases. Now, this is an example from BBC Bite Size. If you want to describe the desert, you can write, the sand burned, the dust stung, but we marched on regardless. What is the mood, do you think? Stubborn, stifling. All right. Okay, well, I'll show you. Determined, mood, and the desert is the setting. Sand burned, the dust stung, but we marched on regardless. Mountains, but hopeful. Small white cloudlets hovered so close to our heads we felt we could touch them. If you want to describe the beach and excited atmosphere, crabs scuttled hither and thither. Children squealed in delight. Right? So all these things you can bear in mind if you when you teach your students creative writing. And I think I will still devote some time in my next lecture to this. But for now, it's over. Thank you very much. So.